Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can also get yourself a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, I am going over the Sword and Shield buy list. You can obviously get my full reaction over this set in the set review, but today I'm going to be going over the core essentials as well as some more sort of out there cards that you may want to just get into the binder because they have some potential for the future, or they could be something you want to mess around with. So let's jump into this review. As you can see here, core essentials, this is the first slide. It's a bit all over the place, so I'm going to try and use my mouse to show you guys where I'm talking each time. But essentially, this is what I believe to be core essentials cards that are expected to be involved in tier 1 or 2 contenders or have obvious future potential. So I'm actually going to start off with the trainers over here. We have Marnie, Professor's Research, and Quick Ball. These are guaranteed 4-ofs that you need to get a hold of because they are going to be parts of engines of a lot of different decks in the future. These really are phenomenal cards that will be played in all sorts of different builds. We just go below that and you can see Metal Saucer is an integral piece for metal archetypes, and there are some very big metal archetypes coming out, especially with the new Zacian here, possibly the strongest Pokemon in the set. So picking up Metal Saucers if you are going down Zacian decks is going to be really important, and just has great future potential on top of this card already. Evolution Incense could also be just a very versatile card. You can think about all these VMAX Pokemon can think about using it. The Sablegoons deck that you can see on here can all think about using it, and there's plenty of other more rogue things out there. And again, just has great future potential. Same for Aurora Energy. It's great for Mewtwo currently. It's great for ADP currently, just thanks to the Guzma-Hala engine. And that Guzma-Hala engine is not going to get weaker anytime soon, so having this as a searchable special energy card seems very reasonable for sure. We have the Fishing Rod. Feel like you don't need to maximize copies of this card because it never really feels like a 4-of index. 3 should be plenty to see you through. We have some amazing tools from the Sword and Shield expansion. Air Balloon is basically a slightly worse version of Floatstone. I don't think currently you need it in any sort of 4-ofs. I can see it predominantly as like 2-ofs index. But I'm going to say go ahead and grab 4 copies because there have been formats where Floatstone was a 4-of, like in Garbodor formats and stuff like that. And there may just be 1 or 2 synergistic cards away from needing a higher count of these balloons. Lucky Egg seems like a really good option to draw cards and stamp-proof yourself for some non-GX attacking decks. I think immediately this becomes a great card in Baby Blacephalon, probably like a 3-of in like a Jirachi Blacephalon-based build. But I think going ahead and getting 4 just because of its versatility. Giant Charm and the Fine Band both seem like very reasonable cards. I don't think we're ever going to be maxing out copies of this card unless the math is really, really important to change in certain situations. But again, with Guzma-Hala engines, having just a couple of these in your decks is certainly a reasonable option. We'll finish off the trainers with a few reprints. There's Great Ball, there's Pokemon Catcher, and there's Energy Retrieval. These are all just like decent cards to have in and around the binder. The regular Pokemon Catcher may be stronger than Great Catcher or Customs in certain archetypes, so something to bear in mind. Energy Retrieval, very good immediately for like the Lapras-based deck, maybe some Fire-based decks as well, stuff like that. Baby Blacephalon again might have this in addition to Fire Crystals, that's why I have such a high count here. And Great Ball can just be an additional searching option if we need to, especially good right now when you can't use a supporter turn 1. This guy can be great for evolution-based decks just to give you a good chance of getting multiple basics down in addition to quick balls and comms and such, so that's obviously very good. We'll start off with Pokemon, I'll go right to the middle here. Zacian V, I've already mentioned, is probably the strongest Pokemon from the set. Intrepid Sword is great consistency. Brave Blade, obviously a great attack when you have those sources to start powering him up. Zacian with ADP and Zacian with Luke Metal both look to be archetypes that could be top tier. So I'm saying 4 copies. I believe it would be a 4-copy card in these decks simply because when you go first, you need to have a Zacian down so you can take advantage of that Intrepid Sword ability just to draw yourself some extra cards. And physically having the highest amount of copies of this guy is going to be the best way to do that, I think, overall. So, yeah, 4 copies of Zacian V if you do want to be playing some very strong metal decks. We'll come over to the Berserker now, the Galarian Berserker. It does a nice damage buff of 20 for the metal stuff. I've only put a 1-1 necessary really in here because I believe ADP lists probably only need that 1-1 buff for Zacian V to now be hitting 270, well actually 280, which is great. But I've also put the plus here if you want to try out a full-on turbo Zacian Berserker list and you just ignore the ADP and you just try and use the Galarian Meowth to search out these Berserkers for you and just have these as your damage modifiers. I think that is also potentially an archetype that could be very solid. We'll then go up to the top left of the screen here where we have some nice setup Pokemon. A 4-4 Cincino line, I believe, is worth picking up. This Make Do ability, I believe it's called in English, is obviously great. It's a new version of Trade on a non-GX, and I can see this being part of plenty of engines for sure. The Oranguru, definitely pretty awesome as well. I think oftentimes he'll be a one-of index just to help out if you are using the Dene engines or Magnolia engines. But also this could be a 2-of if you're going to try and build the Magcargo based deck, so that's why I've got 2 copies in here. Indeedee is a nice healer with its Watch Over ability. I've said just 2 copies. I can see it going into Malamar builds of Mewtwo for sure. I can see it going into a couple of these VMAX tanking style archetypes like Snorlax and Stonejourner. So I put a plus there in case you want to try a full-on Healy list with any of these VMAX Pokemon, but I think grabbing a couple always sounds good. Cramorant's a nice sniper of the Dene GX. He's got a colorless attack cost, so he has potential for a bunch of decks in future. His turn 1 attack isn't the worst either, so he's a pretty reasonable card just to get one of, and he'll come out in and out of the binder here and there in all sorts of decks. For fire stuff, we get a couple of nice regular basic V Pokemon. The Torkoal can be nice for early pressure, doing potentially 180 damage, and also can do some discards of energies, which can be really painful against things like ADP and a few other archetypes out there right now, which is obviously very good. Victini V essentially is a baby version of the Gardevoir GX on a basic with that same attack cost, and he has things like Welder supporting him to try and increase that damage output. It also has Spreading Flames that can attach from the discard pile, so certainly a powerful card. It feels like it'll mainly be like a one-of index, but certainly a strong one for fire decks. I think Mewtwo could think about adding this in, as well as things like Ability-Based Zard and even Magcargo and stuff like that. So Victini V, definitely strong. Now, there are a lot of V and V Max Pokemon, and I all believe they could be like in between tier 2 contenders, I think, for the most part. I think all of the V Max Pokemon, I don't think any of them will reach tier 1. But I think all of them could be in and around tier 2. So it might be quite an expensive Core Essentials list for you guys, but I think it's worth picking up 3/3 lines of the Snorlax because he could potentially be a 390 hit point Pokemon, which is silly as a sponge. He can have 3 CE available to him. He can have Welder available to him. So there's certainly going to be a home for Snorlax at some point. Morpeko seems to be a decent hit and run kind of dude, and having the VMAX with potential memory energy plays sounds cool to be tanky in the late game, and also to help you get around things like Obstruct as an annoying attack and things like that, as well as having just higher base output from the VMAX. Tapu Koko V seems great in Pikarom and also could be considered in the new Morpeko deck. Stonejourner obviously has good type coverage for Morpeko and Pikarom, which is a big deal here. It has some good acceleration from its own VMAX's attack, and also has things like Baby Zygarde available to it. I'm going to be doing a video of Stonejourner V pretty soon. I know I rated this card very high in my set review, and I still stand by this. I think it's going to have a decent matchup spread because of the amount of healing that it can have. It's probably decent against things like Zacian-based builds, and with its type coverage, it's pretty strong against Pikarom and such as well. And if Snorlax starts coming into play as well, you have another auto win on your hands, which is also pretty sweet. The Frostmoth deck doesn't seem like it's going to reach the tippy top heights, but we have already seen the buckets coming out pretty soon, which could really make this a decent investment. I think always I would be picking up the Frostmoths here, even if you don't believe so much in the Lapras. I think always picking up these Frostmoths are probably a good idea because his ability is absolutely insane, and as soon as we get some potentially stronger attackers or just more attackers for you to spam, it's going to become a really integral part of the metagame at some point. If you are a believer in the Lapras itself, obviously try and pick those up as well. And then we have the Sablegoons deck. I do think this has a lot of threatening options available to it. I think especially as long as we have that Yveltal GX available in the format, this deck seems to have a lot of push potential against other tag team and 3 prize based decks, which is obviously very good for you just because you can do some nice reasonable trades. And that Obstruct attack is very, very ugly to deal with lots of like full-on basic builds. And that does seem to be taking up a good portion of the meta right now. So I still believe in Sableye, and I'm going to be picking up the cards to try and be able to play this for sure. Onto the Believer buy list now. These are cards that still may end up being in mid-tier contenders or just have a good amount of potential that are worth picking up, maybe putting in the binder. I'm not saying that you have to get any of these cards. But if you have a soft spot for some of these, or if you want to try out some of these lists, by all means, go for it. So we'll start off with the item cards and trainers that I don't really believe are mandatory to pick up. Bead seems like an okay supporter. Potentially, it's a little bit harsh to have it on this slide and not the other one, but I feel like it's only a maybe in a couple of archetypes, like a maybe in Morpeko, a maybe in Sableye. So I don't think it's mandatory to have this card, but it can provide some universal acceleration, which might be good for future for sure. Team Yell Grunt seems worse than other disruptive options that we have out there, but I have seen some Japanese successful lists actually been maining this card in their list, so something to bear in mind. Rotom Bike, I'm personally against. I think it's a pretty poor trainer card, but there may just be enough decks out there that can't rely on getting draw power turn 1 in any other means, so having these in the binder just in case I'm wrong would be something that could be interesting. And Hyper Potion seems okay for things like Snorlax and potentially a few other VMAX Pokemon that come out in future, so this is certainly one that I'm going to think about picking up just for future potential for sure. We come to the bottom left now, where you see sort of control corner really here. There's Seeking that can help remove energy cards, which is really annoying for Pidgeotto style decks potentially, or could be the face of his own controlling deck just with more hammers and such. There's a nice 3CE Noctowl that can shuffle things back into your opponent's deck, which is annoying. There's Grapploct, which is also an annoying attack that can try and lock things. I've said a 1+ here because if you want to have it as like a tech in birds, it's probably only a 1 of, but you could also think about making a full-on Grapploct control deck if you want to. Orbeetle seems worse than Chip Chip, but if you do want to go down this stage 2 route instead, trying to pick up a thin Orbeetle line wouldn't be too shabby. I actually think Galarian Stunfisk has a decent shot of going into Pidgeotto control just to have more basics on those opening turns, just so you don't get donked even though you're not able to use Elm on 1 and whatever, or even if you are going towards sort of Cincino based engines where you don't even go for Elm, you go for other supporters and such, just regular draw supporters and Ball Search. Potentially having things like Stunfisk in those opening turns to protect your board and try and remove energies from the opponent's active could be decent. Nickit is really annoying in terms of forcing your opponent to a low hand size pretty early on. I think right now there aren't many decks that are going to be playing physical Dark Energy, and there aren't that many actually playing like Aurora Energy unless it's specifically for the tag team that you want to use it for. So at the moment it's kind of waiting in the wings, but it has a really powerful attack available to it. We come to center screen here, and Zamazenta is far weaker than Zacian V right now, but you may still think about adding like 1 into your list, especially if you are a defensive build of Zacian, like Luke Metal. You could think about having 1 in the list just for that shield, but at the same time, you could think about this being a future Keldeo GX. We've seen how strong Keldeo has been. Even though when it initially came out, it wasn't all that strong, it took just 1 set later for it to be a really dominant card in the metagame. Zacian, as more VMAX Pokemon come out, will become more relevant. So I've put a 2+ here, just in case you want to try and bank some value of some Zamazentas, knowing that it has a good amount of metal support behind it already, and as more VMAXs come out, its ability gets stronger and stronger. We have some pretty interesting stage 2s from the starters of this set. I think Inteleon's really cool for things like Chandelure, things like Nidoqueen, a few other archetypes out there right now as well could use Inteleon, so I'm going to see if I can try and make any of those sorts of more rogue decks work, but he's the thing sort of carrying it on his shoulders with his amazing ability, as well as the Drizzile. Cinderace, I put a 2+ here because I can see him just being, 2 copies of just the Cinderace and ignoring these cards and just going down again that Chandelure route, or having a 2/2 line in a baby Charizard based deck just to have some more guaranteed damage throughout the game while you use Roaring Resolve on the bench and try and build up bigger attacks with your Charizards. Or you could try and go all out Cinderace deck if you want to. Rillaboom, we've seen the new Rillaboom V Max, which actually looks like it has a lot of potential. So right now, this card is not going to be having a big impact on the Sword and Shield meta, but potentially when we get that Rillaboom V Max, it could be a far stronger card because its acceleration options are very, very strong. The Delmise would probably just be a 1-of in the sort of Rillaboom-based decks. Maybe not even good enough, but certainly could be a 1-of, just because it has a 1 energy attack cost, and if people are able to like knock out Grookey's and stuff and you're missing your Rillaboom pieces, you can still at least put pressure on the opponent, which is something to bear in mind. We have Keldeo V, if you want to try a non-Lapras based build of Frostmoth, potentially going down like Keldeo plus Giant Bomb route could be something that you go for. But at the moment I think it's a little bit weaker than just pure Lapras. There's something like Gengar Wob. Again, I think the Gengar is lying in wait for a nice Psychic VMAX Pokemon that can be the face of the tanking archetype, because right now it's just things like Alolan Muck Muck or Mewtwo. And right now that doesn't seem to be cutting it. I don't think it's going to be consistent enough, but in future, if we do get a very strong Psychic VMAX, I can certainly see Gengar being strong. You don't need to pick up any Ghastly or Haunters, because we have that really good Ghastly that can, you know, when it gets knocked out, you can go ahead and grab Haunters from your deck, so you don't actually need any of the new stuff other than the Gengars themselves. The Wob would pretty much go hand in hand with this Gengar-based deck, just to like undo a load of damage and throw onto your opponent. And in the bottom right, we have some interesting stage ones that you might want to try and build around. Copperajah can do some big damage and can have a silly amount of hit points, especially because it has buff padding available to it. It can be a 240 hit point 1 prizer, which is pretty gross. Especially because it does 220 and you can try and buff that with Berserker. So again, the amount of support metal type stuff has Copperajah might be worth trying to build around. Claydol, potential good typing if Pikarom comes back in the format and is relatively efficient as well. It does knock itself out, but something to bear in mind. And Poltergeist has that same attack as the Gengar and Mimikyu Tag Team GX, but on a 1-prize Pokemon. It's also got 60 hit points, so it's available for an Elm engine, so something to bear in mind there. But usually just going to be a little bit rogue in my book. And then there's the potential of picking up just a Galarian Rapidash. Status condition aren't really running the game right now, but it could be something lying in wait for future. And this just feels like it could be a nice like Ditto Evolution style card of a tech if there are going to be any more archetypes out there in the future which are going to be built around those special conditions. So that's all really for the Sword and Shield buy list. Quite a simple one this time around. Unfortunately, as we go back to the core essentials, you can see that the VMAXs, you probably want to pick your battles here. Try and pick, you know, like 1 or 2 of your favorites of the VMAXs rather than buying all of them at once. I do think Zacian is pretty much going to be right at the front of the metagame as we come into this expansion. I believe Mewtwo will still be very strong. I believe both Zacian builds are going to be really strong. I think personally, the things like Goons, Stonejourner, and the Morpeko are probably going to be stronger than the Moth and the Snorlax, but that's just my initial impressions. It's still super early, so it's hard to say overall. Let me know what you guys think about the buy list. What cards from the Believer list are you going to be picking up? Was there anything that I missed out on my buy list? I'll hear it all down below. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in another Sword and Shield video tomorrow. Cheers.